Welcome to episode 87 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Laws Guy. It's January 26, 1992. We are in Dakar, in Senegal, at the Stade de l'Amitié, and we're about to watch a final that refuses to choose a winner. Two West African neighbors, two football identities, and two very different squads. Ghana arrive with history, 4 AFCON titles already in the cabinet, and the swagger that comes with it. They are the Black Stars, a national team that has spent decades acting like a continental institution. Ivory Coast arrive with something else, a sense of unfinished business. They've been regulars at AFCON, they've had players, they've had promise, but they have never held the trophy. And for the first time, they built a side that looks like a final team, structured, disciplined, and almost impossible to score against. But this story isn't only about tactics, it's about pressure, politics, egos, and the cruel coin flip psychology of the penalty spot. But how did we get here? AFCON 1992 is hosted by Senegal. It is also a tournament in transition, expanded to 12 teams, condensed group stages, and a knockout bracket that forces teams to show their nerve quickly. Ghana come in as one of the giants, and they play like it. They win their group with 2 1-0 victories. Abedi Pele scores against Zambia, and Tony Yeboah scores late against Egypt. It's not flamboyant, it's professional. Ivory Coast, meanwhile, built their case the Ivorian way, not with spectacle, but with control. They beat Algeria 3-0, and they draw Congo 0-0, top of the group, 3 goals scored, none conceded. And as the tournament moves into the knockouts, the contrast sharpens. In the quarterfinal, Ghana are tested and respond. They beat Congo 2-1, with goals from Yeboah and Abedi Pele. Ivory Coast are dragged into deep water. They go to extra time against Zambia, and in the 94th minute, Donald Olivier Sie delivers a single shot that feels like a door unlocking. Then come the semi-finals. Ghana beat Nigeria 2-1. It's a heavyweight match. Nigeria strike first, and Ghana respond through Abedi Pele and Prince Polly. They're in the final, again. Ivory Coast meet Cameroon, and nothing moves. Goalless after extra time, and Ivory Coast win, on penalties. They've reached their first AFCON final without losing a match, and without conceding. But if Ivory Coast arrive at the final with serenity, Ghana arrive with a storm brewing, because the semi-final win carries a hidden cost. Abedi Pele, the best player in the tournament, the heartbeat of Ghana, their captain, is suspended for the final. And when your captain is out, the armband becomes more than a strip of fabric. It becomes a referendum. And here's where the story turns into investigative territory, because there are multiple versions, and the truth lives in the overlap. The expected logic is simple. Abedi Pele is out, the assistant captain steps up, and Tony Yeboah, senior striker, European-based, a leader, believes that should be him. But on match day, Ghana's German coach, Otto Pfister, names Anthony Baffoe as captain instead. Baffoe is not a nobody. He's a defender raised in Germany, one of the early diaspora figures to wear the Black Stars shirt, respected, serious, and seen by some as neutral in a divided camp. But the timing is explosive. Yeboah later says, Pfister told the squad the decision was driven by a message, a letter from Accra, instructing that Baffoe must wear the armband. Pfister disputes that version, flatly. He says, no letter, no instruction. He frames the decision as a leadership call. Baffoe, in his eyes, was the calmest center of gravity in a tense squad. Either way, the key point is not the paperwork. It's what happens in a dressing room when trust breaks 30 minutes before a final. Ghana do not enter the match united. Instead, they enter it carrying a grievance. And that grievance becomes part of how the final unfolded. So let's dive in. It's not a classic in the way people usually mean classic. There are no goals, no decisive move, no single moment that becomes a highlight package. Instead, it becomes a slow psychological siege. Ghana create chances, including one early miss that haunts. Ivory Coast defend with a kind of collective patience that suggests that they were built for exactly this kind of day. And late, Ivory Coast nearly steal it. A break, a chance, a shot. But Ghana's keeper, Edward Ansah, keeps them alive. Extra time arrives, and the match tightens again. Their legs tire, their minds race, and both teams drift toward that same inevitable outcome: penalties. If you've watched enough shootouts, you know the rule. It's never about who can score, it's about who still can when everything is shaking. The first 5 kicks each begin to build a pattern, and then the pattern breaks. There are misses, there's a save, there's a wobble, and then something remarkable happens. Nobody else misses. Sudden death becomes a conveyor belt of nerve, one after another. Defenders, midfielders, substitutes. Men who have barely touched the ball in 120 minutes, now asked to deliver the cleanest strike of their lives. And then, because this is the first major final of its kind, it keeps going until the list of takers run out, which means the goalkeepers step up. Alain Guamene for Ivory Coast scores against his counterparty, Edward Ansah, who in turn then scores against Guamene. When you watch the footage, the keepers are remarkably stoic. Now it has gone beyond football. It's become ritual. So it comes back around. Ivory Coast Basile Aka Kwame steps up again and scores again. And then Ghana's new captain on this day, Anthony Baffoe, steps up for the second time. And this is the moment when football does football things. Baffoe's penalty is saved by Guamene, and Ivory Coast win its first AFCON. And Ghana, 4-time champions, leave the field not beaten by a better team, but broken by the thinnest margin imaginable. A final decided by one save from a man who never conceded a goal all tournament. For Ivory Coast, the 1992 win becomes a foundational myth, a title built on structure, discipline, and an almost stubborn refusal to concede. For Ghana, 1992 becomes one of the sharpest what-ifs in their history. What if Abedi Pelé had been available? What if the captaincy decision had been made earlier or handled differently? And what if the dressing room had been one room, not 2 camps? And history adds a brutal twist. Ghana have not won AFCON since 1982, and Ivory Coast have won again and again. In 2015, these same 2 nations meet in another AFCON final, another goalless draw, and another shootout, and it goes all the way to the goalkeepers again. But this time, Ivory Coast win it because Ghana's keeper's shot was saved. And in 2024, Ivory Coast win a 3rd title on home soil. Meanwhile, Ghana's legacy remains immense, but the trophy drought remains real. 1992 is famous because it was the first major international final where everyone had to step up in the shootout. Ivory Coast's relationship with shootout marathons continues. The 2015 AFCON final, as I just mentioned, and in AFCON 2006, Ivory Coast and Cameroon produce a shootout so long it becomes almost absurd. 42 penalties, with every player scoring, before Samuel Eto'o finally misses and Didier Drogba finally ends it. When Ivory Coast go to the penalties, history tends to follow. So what should we take away from January 26, 1992? You know it. 3 points. First, finals are won in dressing rooms as often as on pitches. Ghana had pedigree, stars, and momentum, but they went into the match carrying a disruption, and in a 0-0 final, that disruption matters. Second, Ivory Coast didn't steal this title. They engineered it. 3 group goals, then a 1-0 in extra time, then 2 shutouts, then a shootout win. A tournament plan built around conceding nothing and surviving everything. And third, penalties are football's most honest lie. They look like technique, but actually they are pressure in its purest form. And on this day, the pressure went so far that even goalkeepers had to shoot. On this day in 1992, the AFCON final didn't choose a hero. It chose the last man to blink. And he blinked at the very spot where the captain's armband becomes heaviest. That's all for episode 87 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history. A few days ago, a colleague of mine gave me a great idea to an upcoming episode, so I want to encourage you, the listeners, to get in touch with me if there's a story, a quirk, or a match, anything from the beautiful game that you'd want me to talk about on the show. My email is otd@17lawsguide.com. Your engagement, your ratings, and your sharing the show is what makes it keep growing and climbing the charts. Tomorrow, on episode 88, we go to the 1994 Caribbean Cup and one of the most bizarre qualifiers ever played, where both teams try to score own goals to reach extra time. Stay tuned.